Hello and welcome to Home Instead's podcast series, Talk Franchise, aiming to give you an insight into the world of franchising. My name is Luke Spellman, Franchise Development Manager here at Home Instead, and in today's episode, I'm joined by my colleagues Paul Evans and Imogen Clarke. Paul Evans from HI Resales and Imogen Clarke, Head of Franchise Development at Home Instead. They're on the episode to talk about all things resales. Who is right for a resale? What does the process look like for a buyer and seller? And ultimately, how to prepare and approach a brand if resales are what you're interested in. I hope you enjoy. Well, hello, guys. Thank you very much for joining me today. I think we should start firstly by introducing ourselves. And I'm going to start by saying that we are all actually one team, aren't we? In fact, we make up the whole franchise development team at Home Instead. Paul, could you start firstly by introducing yourself and HI Resales?
Of course, yeah. Good to be here, Luke. So I'm the broker for HI Resales, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Home Instead. So I stand slightly apart and I'm the broker. So I'm the guy that brings together the deals for the resales. I've been a broker for 30 years. So 26 of those years working out in the big bad world, bringing sales together. And then 4 years ago, HI Resales was set up and I became the bespoke broker at that point for Home Instead. So a lot of experience, a lot of it in the care industry. So within that remit, I've sold groups of care homes, groups of children's day nurseries, and now, of course, it's solely Home Instead and franchising.
Thanks. And Emmy, could you reintroduce yourself as a multi-time former guest of the podcast?
Of course, the listeners might be a bit bored of me now. So I'm Imi, I'm Head of Franchise Development at Home Instead. I've been at Home Instead for 11 years. My passion is really bringing in franchisees who want to make a difference but also run very successful businesses. And our team that is sat here, it's our responsibility to ensure that we're bringing in the right people into the network who are able to grow really great businesses, but in a really ethical, values-driven way.
Thank you. And I know you've been on previously and we've discussed kind of start from scratch opportunities as well as resales at times, but today's conversation really is all about resales. Whenever it's to do with new territories or start from scratch, you're not really involved, Paul, are you?
No,
by virtue of them being existing businesses. So, Imi, could you sort of, from Home Instead's point of view, explain why HI Resales was set up and what purpose did it serve for us when there are brokers that you could go to outside?
Yeah. So, and previously we did use external brokers, and that's actually how we met Paul. So, just to put into consideration, Home Instead in the UK are about 20 years old now. And so some of our franchisees' businesses are getting to that point. And in their lives, you know, if you think about your own life, are people in one particular role for 20 years? Probably not. And so people want to start next chapters. They may want to retire. They might have grandkids or whatever it is involved. They want to move across the country, something like that. And Home Instead will probably be the end of their current chapter. And a resale is a really great opportunity for them to realise the return on their investment as well. And something I'm really passionate about at Home Instead is ensuring that our franchisees, yes, they're making a good profit and they're making a good salary for themselves, but actually that asset that they have grown for this number of years, they've got a really great value when they walk away as well. So resale is a really important piece of any franchise business. Now, don't get me wrong, because I know we talk generally about the franchising sector. There are going to be younger franchisors who are a few years old, 10 years old, that won't have any resales. And I'm setting these guys aside because they're younger in age. But really, if you're looking at a more mature network of franchisors, you should see that about 10% of their network are for sale at any one time. And that is what the British Franchise Association recommend. It's good practice. It demonstrates that the franchisees have built good businesses. They're getting a return on investment. Yeah. So it's a really good sign for somebody looking at a franchisor generally if you're looking for new or resale.
Great, no, thank you. So we're so used to the term resale, and it might seem obvious for us explaining this, but should we go into actually what that is and maybe a bit about how they come about?
Yes. So a resale will come about really as and when. I think it feels like for us. Someone will crop up with a conversation and that's it, they're ready to sell. So it really is when that franchisee decides that there may be a few different things. They may think, I've grown this business to where I can do. And really, if I continue to run this business, I'm doing a disservice to my team members who I want to be able to develop. And I'm doing a disservice to older people in the community who I can't provide services for because I'm not growing my business. And they might realise that and they want to sell their business to somebody else coming in who can do that. Or it might be somebody that's growing a really fantastic business and actually they are now ready to retire. They can see in themselves that actually they're going to be a little bit tired in the next few years and they're already anticipating that. And I think we'd all be in agreement that that's the best time to sell your business or to start thinking about selling your business. The worst time, and of course this does happen, is where people are already tired and perhaps they've lost that drive and that passion and they were probably ready to get out a year, 18 months ago. And so they decide to sell their business now. That is always probably the more difficult one for us, almost from like an emotional point of view, because these people have put their heart and souls into their businesses. They've got to a certain point, but actually they've become tired and it started to decline. And for us, you need that energy in the business. The team need that energy to be able to grow and be driven. And so you've got these different, I suppose, 3 stages where a franchisee would like to sell their business.
Have you got anything to add to that, Paul?
Resale. It's an interesting term. It's something that really just applies to the franchise sector. In any other arena, you would talk about selling a business, but within franchising, we call it a resale. Just to broaden on what Imi said, that's absolutely hit the nail on the head. It's about timing. It's getting that timing right. As Imi alluded to, when people run out of steam, and that's inevitable, people get older. And when we consider that the Home Instead brand is now 20 years and on, that first tranche of buyers are looking at retirement age now. Unpalatable as it may be, there's only 3 ways that people will leave a business. They'll either sell it, they'll die running it, or the business will close down. So those second 2 options are, they're not even worth considering. So that leaves you with a resale. And that's obviously where the 3 of us become involved. And you guys look after the ethics, the culture, the values, and I look after the money and the deal.
And I think as well, it's probably important for people to understand that because of all of these variables and the different reasons why people might consider putting their business up for sale, whether it's retirement or burnout or deciding that someone else is right to run that business for personal reasons, what the opportunities then that presents for people looking to get into franchising, whilst the start from scratch opportunity is quite clear cut and it almost looks the same regardless of where it is in the country, resales provide a variety of options with businesses that are different, with different team sizes, different challenges, different benefits, and for a new owner coming in, certainly a different journey to sort of growing that business or maintaining the growth that it's had. So, for those listening, actually, there's quite a spectrum of resales, isn't there? And a real variety of
absolutely,
price.
Absolutely. I mean, our spectrum is anywhere between 200,000 and 2 million.
And growing.
And growing, yeah, absolutely. And each one of those resales will offer different opportunities, but the general characteristics are, and this is where they differ from starting up from scratch, is that they will offer an instant cash flow. So from day one, that business is generating profit, is generating a cash flow, which will service debt, which will pay directors' emoluments, which will pay for the salaries and the care pros. So from day one, that business is generating cash and it's generating profit, as opposed to starting from scratch where you will need a balance sheet with cash in it to support you through that initial growth period. The payback is obviously you'll need a larger cash investment to buy a resale than you would do starting up from scratch. Or when I say a cash investment, the deposit that a banks want to see, I should just qualify that. But it does offer various advantages, I would say. That there will invariably be a team there in place. Invariably, that cash flow is there. It's not for everyone. You're walking into somebody else's team, that will present challenges.
Yep.
But if you're experienced in running a team, if you're experienced in budget management, if you're experienced in, you mentioned motivation. Sorry, it was you, Amy, who mentioned motivation. If you're experienced in those things, a resale could be one of the things that'll work very well for you.
I think for us as well, it opens up a wide range of people who can be applicable for a business with Homestead or any franchisor. But you're not just looking for that new franchisee who wants to set up a new business from scratch. You're looking for a very different person, and that brings in so many skills and experience into the network that we can then learn from and increase our support and our knowledge as well. So it's definitely a partnership, franchising, and resales just gives this beautiful opportunity to bring so many skilled people who knew wouldn't be right for them, but there are many established businesses that would be right for them.
Yeah, and you touched on something there about the type of person that might want to buy a new business versus resale. Would you say actually there's further variety in the types of individuals that would buy different types of resales too? And if so, could you both maybe go into that a little bit?
Absolutely. The spectrum is enormous for the people who a resale would appeal to. You will, or I hope most people listening to this will understand that the challenge is that buying a business at, say, £200,000 brings, that will need investment in terms of time, not necessarily money, but in terms of time. Growth will be the watchword, dynamism, enthusiasm. Those will be the things that will drive that business forward and grow it. At the other end of the spectrum, the skills required if you're making if you're acquiring a business at 2 million, which already has a very established team, growth won't be quite so meteoric by default. But the skills required in steering a ship that is already successful, that is already generating good profits, those skills are slightly different insofar as you may just be looking more strategically rather than having rolling your sleeves up and getting your hands into the business. You'll be much more working on the business rather than working in the business. So that skill set is different, subtly different, but it's different.
And I think most people that we speak to are aware of that, and they can almost put themselves into the right stage of the business that they'd be interested in.
Yeah.
Even yesterday, I was speaking to somebody and they said, right, well, I've got X amount of cash and this is what I want within a business. And he knew straight away, I don't want the kind of 200,000 because that's day to day and that's not what I want. But I equally know I can't afford the 2 million. I want somewhere kind of comfortably in between where I can make a difference. Yeah. But actually the operational piece day to day is kind of already in place with the team. Yeah.
So a stronger foundation, but maybe not as strong as it can get, or stable or established, I should say. But with some of that growth already behind it, and probably a larger team, larger client base, maybe a larger or more recognised local reputation and things like this.
Yeah, and if somebody is considering a resale, I think it's really important because most of the people that we speak to are already at this point where they've considered the amount of cash that they have, what the banks can contribute. So they've kind of got that level of what's realistic for them, what's affordable. And actually, if their skill set matches as well. I think the danger comes when somebody comes in with very little cash and says, I don't want really anything to do with it day to day. You're really not being realistic there. So people have to really think about their financial contribution as well as their time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know throughout actually the discussion over the past few minutes, I think we have actually touched on a few benefits for that. But let's be really clear and have a discussion about what we would see the benefits of a resale being. So I'm going to split it, because I think to talk about a resale as one thing actually isn't completely accurate when we have seen that there's the variety. So for, say, a smaller resale, a £200,000 to £300,000 resale, what would the benefits of that kind of purchase be?
So the benefits are going to be, I mean, I would say that you're very quickly going to get your return on investment, because realistically for a smaller resale, and I'm saying that, but I'm thinking probably in the wider franchise network, that will be small to some brands like ours, but it might be quite large for others. So you've also got to consider the sector and the brand that you're looking at as well. But typically for a smaller business, it's going to be in quite an early stage of their growth with the brand, and that might be for a variety of reasons to do with the selling franchisee.
Yeah.
So it means that you stepping in, there are loads of things that you can incorporate that the head office or national office can support you with to be able to very quickly grow. And it's likely that the team that is in that smaller business are very stable. They've been there for a long time. They know exactly what they're doing, but they probably need some leadership, some KPIs set. So there are some very quick wins that you can put into a smaller business like that. And as I said, then start to grow and make that return on investment very quickly. And when it comes to looking at affording a smaller business, it can seem quite scary with the initial investment and looking at the small profits and things like that. But you're taking a risk in buying a business, and you need to put that hard work in to turn it around.
Yeah.
So something like that, I think, I suppose it also depends on who you are. I think for me, that seems really quite motivating for myself.
Yeah.
For somebody else, they might not want to do that at all. A larger business, the benefit is that you have to spend less time day to day in that business, and actually you're really mentoring the team who are already in that business, and you can see people who are more operational in that business who'll be able to step up to become leaders, and as the business grows you might then create your own senior leadership team, and the real benefit and driver for you there might be seeing those people grow and being able to perhaps own multiple franchise businesses with this company and this SLT senior leadership team overhead. And so from a people point of view, that's where you might really get your love for the job in seeing your team grow. So it's two very different things. And as I said, it's just dependent on who you are and where your passion comes from.
Yeah, and I think you're right, actually, if you're approaching this and looking for, well, any franchising opportunity, but maybe you focused on a resale opportunity, it's asking yourself some questions like that, isn't it? And actually working out, are you up for the challenge of change management and potentially some shifting around of the team, maybe some hard conversations, some emotional conversations, but the rewards are all ahead of you, and you can really grow it into the business you want? Or do you want that stability from the get-go? Do you want that immediate income? Do you even want mentorship from the team itself if they're so stable and established? That can be a huge benefit as well.
I think you have to be really honest with yourself on what you want, as we kind of mentioned before, because we do have people that we speak to, and they look at these smaller businesses and they do say, well, it doesn't make much of a profit, so I actually don't think that I can look at this.
Yeah.
Well, okay, if that really scares you, then maybe you should be looking at a startup completely. If you're not knowledgeable on the intricacies of the P&L and what that might mean and how you can turn this business around and how you can perhaps look at the cost and what is needed in that business, then perhaps it is best that you start from the beginning and you learn those foundations and build up from there.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. Have you got anything to add to that, Paul?
So just to add to what Amy was saying, we have numerous examples of people that have bought resales whose experience in their previous career has been as a firefighter for a large group. They're the people that are parachuted in to sort out issues at a particular location, whether that be a care home or a manufacturing plant or whatever. And they really relish that challenge and are really, really adaptable and successful in turning not a failing business, but recognizing the challenges and what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And they can add a lot of value very quickly. There are other people that have come to us and in their career, they've managed existing businesses that just need that strategic hand on the tiller.
Mm-hmm.
So we're reiterating the same issues here, or the same cases, that it is horses for courses. But just to pick up on something Imi was saying about risk, how you look at risk, most of the resales that we're selling, you're looking at getting your money back on the whole investment between 3 and 4 years. So that represents something between a 33 and a 25% yield. Right. That's quite phenomenal. Mm-hmm. There is a risk in that, obviously, but with those sort of yields, it depends how you perceive risk. But if you perceive it in a business sense, you might say that those are acceptable risks.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really, really helpful for people to understand, actually. And I think definitely sets the scene, really, for the remainder of our conversation about what a resale is, who it might be for. So let's get onto a more technical question. A business goes up for sale. It has a price on it.
Mm-hmm.
How is a resale valued then?
Okay, you've got two moving parts to this. You've got EBITDA, which is just an acronym for earnings before interest, taxation, depreciation, amortization. EBITDA is not something that is exclusive to franchising. It's the common factor in the sale of every business.
Yep.
And EBITDA is a formula that's used in many countries, the USA, the UK, most European countries.
Yep.
It's a way of leveling the playing field so you can compare one business against another. So on a company's P&L sheet, there will be things that are very pertinent to the way those directors want to run the business. The obvious ones are directors' pensions. There'll be interest payments on loans, how much debt the business is servicing. These are all very pertinent, and you must, to be able to compare one business to another, you must discard those. So you're looking at the core profitability of a business so you can compare business A with business B.
Yeah.
Quite obviously, if the directors are taking out £160,000 a year in directors' pensions, that's going to make a big hit on the net profit.
Yeah.
Consequently, you can't use net profit for that calculation. So EBITDA is something that has evolved over generations, certainly post-war anyway. So we're talking the last 70 years. It's nothing new, and it isn't pertinent to franchising particularly. That's one part of it. The other part of it is the multiple. The multiple is just an expression of risk. That's all it is. So franchising tends to see higher multiples than standalone businesses. And this is because banks, buyers perceive the risks involved in acquiring a multiple as lower than buying a standalone business. So in comparison, a standalone social care business, domiciliary care business, might attract a multiple of somewhere between 1.75 and 2.5 times the EBITDA. Home instead, it's somewhere between 3 and 4 generally. There are exceptions, but it's somewhere between 3 and 4. I've got to say 4 is exceptional, and again, 3 is as well. So 3.5, 3.6 normality, I guess. So that's significantly higher. And the reason that that's higher is because lenders, buyers perceive the risk as lower. So consequently, the multiple goes up. So I work very closely with yourself and Imi to define what those multiples are. We will look very closely at the way that business performs operationally, how stable the team is, and we'll come up with a multiple there, a risk factor. And then quite simply, EBITDA times risk will give you an idea of where that business should be hitting the market. In the world outside franchising, over and above that, you would then be adding a balance sheet. A balance sheet is what the business owns. We're quite unique insofar as we're selling businesses without a balance sheet. We're selling them cash-free debt-free. That can only happen because a franchisor is overseeing the deal and is part of the deal. So that deletes the necessity for having a balance sheet as part of the sale. It's quite an important part, that. So when we sell a business, it is the business value only and not the balance sheet value as well.
Okay. And do you have anything to add kind of from the franchisor's perspective on, obviously we've gone into the actual equation of evaluation, but what process do you go through to think about what multiple it should have?
Yeah, so as Paul said, we work really closely with Paul or any broker really to make sure that the multiple is fair.
Mm-hmm.
There will be times where a franchisee or a seller will want a particular amount. We want to really make sure that, as I said, it is fair. So I think for somebody coming in and looking at a resale, whether it's in the franchising sector, whether it's care specifically, whatever it might be, I think it's really important that you do your due diligence on that, that you're speaking to the person representing that sale of the business to talk about how the valuation has been done and really get your head stuck into it too.
And maybe bringing in a narrative from the business development team who have worked with them for several years, or
yeah. So that's something that we do. I'm conscious. I want to make it broad enough. So yes, best practice for us is we get Paul involved with our business development consultants. So they're the guys that support our franchisees on a day-to-day basis. They know those businesses like the back of their hand, and so they will be working with Paul and with the franchisee and really kind of almost scoring their business, giving that score to Paul, and then Paul turns that into a multiple that he thinks is fair. And I will say that Paul's valuations are very fair for buyer and seller, and it's just dependent on what the seller then chooses to go for with the amount. Mm-hmm. So it's a really good point. I think going to the franchisor, if you're looking at any resale, how has that multiple been determined and how can they actually evidence that multiple is correct?
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on that fair valuation. All of us, the three of us, we've spent a lot of time working with the banks. So the banks are probably one of the most important people in this deal. They're the largest creditor. Mm-hmm. It's not the buyer, it's the bank who's the largest creditor in the deal. And we've got to a point now, we've got to a point over the last 4 years where the banks now trust our valuation.
Yeah.
So in the world outside Home Instead, a bank will say, we will agree to fund that business at a loan-to-value ratio of 70% or whatever, but we want to see an independent valuation done by that. Those can be quite expensive, actually. So people like Pinders and Taylors, they'll be charging £2,000-3,000 just for an independent valuation. Because we've maintained and we've built that degree of credibility with the banks, they will take our valuation at face value. Yeah. It will stand scrutiny because we've done the valuation. It's a very important point, that.
And it's just something actually to consider as a seller. There might be a certain amount of money that they want to walk away with, but they have to look at what is the evidence within that business. Can they get to that point? And if they can't, but they're still asking for that particular amount of money, the buyer might agree to that, but the banks actually won't agree with that valuation. Yeah. And they will only, like in our case, the banks will fund up to 70%. They'll fund 70% of what they think the valuation is, not 70% of what the seller thinks. So I know there won't be probably any sellers listening to this podcast, but it's something to consider, once you're in your business, because you should always be thinking about your exit journey, even from the minute that you get in. You need to be thinking about a fair, credible valuation, because that's great if you can get it past the buyer, but you won't get it past the banks.
Yeah, and I suppose really with anything that you personally feel connected to, you're going to have a gut feel of its worth, aren't you? You're going to be emotionally connected to something, and so I think most people would probably want to set their sights on a particular target valuation, but actually, as you say, getting it right will ensure that it won't turn away buyers who think it's overvalued or it doesn't justify it. it won't hit a brick wall with the banks. So actually, when we talk about fair, it's really about getting it. It's about it being accurate for the sellers, right for the buyers, and ultimately it'll get through the no funding application.
And we say we know evaluation is fair when the buyer thinks they're overpaying.
Yeah.
The seller thinks they're underpaid. For us, that's where we think it's a good
the middle
valuation.
ground feels
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the banks say yes.
And the banks say yes.
Yeah.
That's the most crucial part, because without that bank funding, as Imi said, buyer and seller can agree on a price, but without the bank saying, yep, that looks right to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that usually necessitates a valuation from me as well, which they'll take. So wandering away from that valuation too far will at some point lead to an issue. And again, from a buyer's point of view, will you want to pay the amount for a business when the bank says, don't get it, don't get it?
Yeah.
You wouldn't.
Yeah, it's that sort of third party kind of validation that you really need. And in a case maybe where someone and obviously many steps go into avoiding this, but should a buyer say overpay, there's then an impact on the business when they run it, right?
Yeah.
So
cash flow will become tighter.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, talking about cash flow, we're in interesting times at the moment. 3 years ago, interest rates were 3.25%, 3.5%. That pressure on cash flow existed, but not to the degree that it does today.
Yeah.
When interest rates are around about 10%, that has a much more significant impact on cash flow. So, yes, of course, wouldn't it be wonderful if a buyer did overpay? But actually, in reality, talking about keeping it fair, is that fair on the buyer when their cash flow is going to be the object of the hurt if somebody's overpaid?
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't want to put businesses at risk, because it puts clients and their care at risk and people's livelihood too. So we've discussed what a resale is. We've discussed how you get to that figure, which can sometimes be a mysterious figure if people don't understand the calculations and considerations that go behind it. So a homestead franchisee who's run an existing business comes to our team and says, I'm ready to sell for a number of reasons. You do the valuation and come up with a bit of a narrative of that business. I'll then produce a prospectus, and really that's the point after which it's on the market. So Imi, could you take us through sort of what the process looks like for someone coming into franchising and taking the resale route?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned it earlier, but the way a franchisee is going to exit that business should always be at the back of their minds, even from day one. So in the business plan, I think we've mentioned on a previous podcast, but we always talk about, what your plan is, and we won't be holding you to it, but just to get an idea, is it going to be 10, 15 years in the business? Do you want to get kids involved? If so, they'll also need to go through an approval process. But if you've decided, right, I'm done, I want to sell my business, we would kind of expect that they start to get their ducks in a row. So speak to a wealth management firm, because part of the process is you will be walking away with a large amount of cash.
Yeah.
And so you should be getting advice on what you can do with that cash, what that means for your future, etc. Because you always want to make sure that you're future planning for yourself.
Yeah.
So that's something that we always talk about, and making sure that you're realistic again with the money that you'll be walking away with. So I know that Paul definitely goes through the costs that are involved with a resale. We've got our own resale kind of Bible almost, that goes through all of this information as well that they can refer back to. But probably between the three of us, I refer to myself as the voice of doom. I'm always the person that will be talking about the negatives through this process. So the timescales probably aren't going to align with what you want it to be. You might want to get out in 6 months, but a resale, depending on the size of your business, could be up to 2 years.
Yeah.
Now, it's probably not likely going to be, but it absolutely could be. That's also going to really weigh heavily on you as an individual, because with us and the sector that we're in, we make our resales confidential. It's up to the franchisee, but we recommend strongly that it's confidential. So it's only them knowing that. And that can really put stress on a franchisee, not being able to tell the team or their peers in the network. As I said, they're welcome to tell who they like, but keeping that secret can really be quite difficult. The other element as well is keeping your head in your business when you're thinking about your future retirement plans. And this is something we stress throughout the entire process. So the whole team, not just franchise development, but the wider team will be aware of that resale. And part of that is to make sure that the team are constantly motivating that franchisee, because there are times where we see someone is thinking about their retirement plan and where they're going to move to, and their head isn't in the business. And that means that their revenue declines, their EBITDA drops, and unfortunately their valuation drops. And the amount of cash they had in their head to retire is actually going down.
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult conversation for any of us to have, to say, look, I know you were planning on this is what you needed, but actually, and it's a difficult conversation to have, but actually the damage that you have done has actually risked your future retirement plans. So for any franchisee, it's talking about staying in the business, keeping yourself driven, keeping yourself motivated. And that might be investing in a coach once a month, once every 6 weeks, whatever it might be, whatever's needed to keep that person up and in the business. So the role of the franchisor will just depend on franchisors. Some people or some brands have loads of experience in resales, as we do, and so we've got a lot of support built around it. But if this was us 15 years ago, we had very little, and so it really just depends on the brand that you're with. But they should be supporting you through this process. And again, there's going to be a line on how much emotional support we can provide as a franchisor. It might be times that we do push you towards a coach or something like that to support you through. But it's really making sure that we're speaking to you honestly, we're managing your expectations, we're following up on everything that you need to know.
Yeah.
For us, obviously, Home Instead own our own brokerage firms. We're able to do a lot more through HI Resales, but we still have that very clear-cut line between Paul and the rest of National Office. And with any resale, well, it's you that does it, but we will still market the resales on our websites. We will talk about them with our database, and we will try and find somebody. But I suppose the biggest piece of work that we do as a franchisor is ensuring that anybody we bring to you that is interested in buying your business has gone through our recruitment process that matches our culture and our values, and that we feel that could really drive that business and support the office team as well.
Yeah.
And yes, that will be less needed in another brand or sector that doesn't require such high values and culture match. But I think this is something really important for us. Our franchisees have bought in because it's a really great brand. It's a growing sector with growing client base. But it's also a franchisor that cares, and that trickles down to the network. And so if we were bringing on resales, we mentioned before the profile is different. You're looking for a very different person with experience, but they still need to have those values within them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's sort of part of the that's what's going through my mind when I speak to individuals who inquire with us and know that they want to purchase a resale. It's trying to find that balance of everything that you both have touched on about the business acumen of an individual or their experience throughout their career that shows that they really could step into a new business and, steer a large ship, as you say, or implement a load of change management, but without ever losing that approach to quality and care that we have. The kindness and compassion needs to be there with those business skills. So that's something that's really quite important to get right, isn't it?
And just to pick up on that, I think that's where HI Resales being part of but separate is very important. We know just how robust, to use a polite word, our conversations can be when we've got Imi and yourself being the advocate for care, quality, ethics, and me being the advocate for should that deal go ahead. And I think having those discussions in a very robust way, and that's in a context where we're respecting each other, we're respecting each other's knowledge and views, is fundamental. But we have those conversations, me on behalf of the of the seller, you on behalf of culture and ethos and values. It works very well because we are able to have those discussions, and we can advocate a different point of view that perhaps the other party hasn't considered.
This is completely on a different point, but I think it kind of blends in quite nicely. So again, going back to the franchisor, having conversations about valuation and your business as an asset is in our sector probably quite jarring, because we talk about clients and high quality care and the number one employer, which is everything that we do. But we also want to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that our franchisees are thinking of their business as an asset and what their return is as well. So I think a big part of our responsibility as well as a franchisor is ensuring that our franchisees know this through their journey and how we can sprinkle that throughout their time with Home Instead. So as well as somebody looking at a franchisor, you want to be asking those questions. Well, how are you making sure that I'm aware of this? How are you going to be supporting me? Not just through the resale process of saying, I'm selling, what's my support like now? But actually, how are you constantly looking at my business? How are you, as a brand, increasing the value in the brand, in the multiple, etc.? Because if you look at other brands in the care sector, their multiple is very different to ours because their brand isn't what ours is.
Yeah. And I guess for people listening who maybe a current franchisee at a different brand or actually have never been in franchising before, the reason we're talking about almost the end point of their journey now, when you come to sell that business, is because, as you say, it's important from day one to have at least a rough plan on when you can see that happening. As you say, you can effectively put steps in place right from the get-go that will mean you're in the best position possible when it comes to selling and moving on, whatever that looks like for an individual. So we're not scared of the exit conversation.
No, we're not at all.
Absolutely.
It doesn't symbolize something negative or a disconnection of that relationship at all.
In fact,
we have an incredibly strong alumni network and don't want to lose touch with those amazing people, but understanding that for a variety of reasons, everyone at some point will move on. Yeah,
it's protecting our franchisees' investments.
And so that's kind of we discussed then the process for a franchisee coming to us to talk about the sale. What does the process look like for someone who has inquired with us about franchising opportunities? They want to join the brand or think at the very least it's franchising is right for them. What kind of things have to go through their mind? What preparation should they do? And ultimately, what can they expect from our process as a whole?
So I think they need to be aware that they would be joining a franchise brand. So it's not like them just buying a standalone business and then being able to do whatever they wanted within that business. They are buying into the Home Instead brand, and there are limitations within what they can do within their business. And I say that we're still a very flexible franchisor. We listen to our franchisee feedback, and some of our best ideas have come from franchisees. But you could not buy a Home Instead brand business and then start to provide legal care to your clients, legal advice, to your clients. So you've got to be aware that coming into a franchise brand has these limitations for you. Now, franchising is definitely open to entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs that like working within a box and given the tools to be able to do that. As I said, the flexibility for new ideas and things to do things better, but really a partnership with the franchisor. And you've got to ask yourself, is that how I want to work? And not everybody does, and that's fine. But it's good to be aware of that when you're coming in straight away. So I definitely think that's something you need to think about yourself first. And if you're unsure, have a conversation with the brand. I'm unsure about X, Y, Z. I want to know more, because it's likely that we'll have the answers. And if we don't, actually, we can introduce you to a franchisee who's had similar concerns, and they can talk to you about their experience as well. So you as somebody coming in to a resale with a franchisor, you should expect to almost, I suppose, there's a line down the middle between broker and franchisor. It's finding out about the brand, how we can support, how you grow your business, all of those kind of operational pieces as a brand more generically. And then on the broker side, it's about that specific business, that snapshot in time, that history of the business.
And on that side, I mean, franchising brings a lot, but it demands a lot from the buyer. What it brings is, first of all, a loan to value ratio from the banks of 70%. Now, bearing in mind, as we've discussed, there's no balance sheet there. That's just all on the goodwill. That's unheard of. You know, when I talk to colleagues in the industry and I say we are selling franchises and we're getting loan to value ratios of 70%, no, that just doesn't happen. But we do, and that's because of the strength of the brand. So you get a very good loan to value ratio from the banks for buying a franchise. The quid pro quo is that you're expected, or you will be prescribed, to do a minimum amount of due diligence so that when you walk in, no stone has been left unturned. Yeah. And again, outside in the big world, the buyer will determine how much due diligence they do. That's, it's buyer beware. That's the law. So if a buyer wants to do a lot of due diligence, that's their prerogative. But by the same token, if they just want a cursory glance at the account, that's their prerogative as well. So we have a prescription that they must employ some external professionals to help them with the due diligence process. So that's legal, financial, and operational. That due diligence process is it is deliberately not influenced by Home Instead, so that all that due diligence means that somebody can walk in with an absolute clarity of what they've bought.
Yeah. And just to add there, this is a recruitment process for the buyer. And so if they're shying away from this due diligence, that's a bit of a red flag for us. Well, why are you staying away from that information? Yeah. So this whole process, we'll be looking at this just as we would for a new. But sorry to interrupt.
No. It's very relevant that people that resist doing that due diligence, and I've got to say, it doesn't happen often, but people unwilling to provide the information, that's a red flag. And again, we come back to the banks being the largest creditor here as a bank. You would be nervous if the person that you're funding isn't able to access that information, or there's excessive time for that information being provided. And that due diligence process is incredibly important. It's frustrating for everybody. There's no getting away from it. It's a frustrating process. But, we use professionals, solicitors, accountants, and auditors that we know, that we trust, that have done this many times before and are able to give very, very high quality, unbiased advice to buyers and sellers. Yeah. And they're an important part of the resale process, that we can present these panels of lawyers, solicitors, accountants, auditors that know the process. Doesn't make it any less frustrating, but at least you're being guided by people that have done it many times before.
And they understand the nuances of the brand, and there'll be no surprises as to why there's higher multiples in place and things like this. Yeah.
And for the buyer, what a massive step ahead you've got going into that business. You know exactly where it is. You know where you can make kind of perhaps cuts in costs, where you actually need to put more costs into. Yeah. You've got such a big advantage stepping in already that you can just hit the ground running.
Yeah, so taking that time and ensuring, as you say, of turning over every stone, and stepping in with total clarity is really important. Yeah. We actually will slow things down sometimes when it's moving quickly, which, for people who, have careers in sales and bringing new franchisees on and brokerage, you would slow down a sale, but it's about getting it right. It's not just about making a sale or bringing a new franchisee on. They have to be there for the future growth of the brand. They have to do right by the clients and the communities that they serve. And I suppose the legacy of the business that they're stepping into as well. A lot of hard work's been put in there already, by the seller.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that this is not necessarily about resales, but I think it's definitely relevant. How do resales pose an additional benefit for people that are thinking about multi-unit? So, I quite often get calls and have introductory meetings with people who they want to skip the start from scratch process. They've got the cash required to buy a resale, but definitely in their long-term plan is ownership of multiple sites or enterprise ownership. So how can multiple resales kind of help with that?
Okay. So multi-unit isn't for every brand. So that's worth considering when you're coming into franchising. Not every franchisor does multi-unit. I would also ask as well, does the brand have any multi-units right now? Because if they don't and you're going to be the first, okay, well, what systems do they have in place to support multi-unit? What does that support look like? Because multi-unit is very different to single operator.
Yeah.
And we would know as a brand that has purely been single operator, moving into multi-unit probably for the last 7 years or so.
Yeah.
So I would definitely be asking that. Buying into a multi-unit operation for us is really exciting. And I really think that's where we see the future of a lot of our resales as well. We have been very open and honest. We have we've done a small number of multi-unit sales, but we see that increasing as we go ahead. We are looking for people who want multi-unit, saying that we still want people who want single operators, but we very much are looking for those multi-units as well. It's really linked into our values, our support structure, how we've built out multi-unit. So individuals who want to run large operations can do so with those multiple businesses. It might be that there is a structure available already for sale, or it might be that they acquire them one by one. Right now, the one by one is probably the more popular route because affordability, you're buying one business at a time.
Yeah.
But also resource, you're able to focus on one before expanding into the other. I think it depends on the person and their experience. So if somebody has already owned multiple businesses at one point or multiple franchise brands, for them, they're probably really best fitted to come in and buy a multi-unit operation within Home Instead. For them, it means they're stepping into a business that already has a senior leadership team that works amongst a few different businesses. So although these 3 businesses have always operated differently under different people, with our support, you would be owning all 3 at one point with a senior leadership team. So that's really where we're moving towards as a brand.
I think that really will be helpful for some people to understand, actually. And I suppose that if actually purchasing, whether it's multiple sites from one individual or multiple sites owned by separate individuals, but all at once, that's one route. And then other individuals thinking about multi-unit as a long-term strategy, but absolutely needing to start with one business to understand the care sector or to understand management of a team that size, or maybe it's even in a new local area of the country. For those individuals, we make clear very, very early on that let us know if multi-unit is part of your long-term strategy, because we can actually advise where opportunities might be available. We have a structure where you have to demonstrate performance for 12 months before you could consider a second acquisition. But of course, then if no one around you is selling a business, where would the opportunities be? So actually, by speaking to us quite literally during the recruitment process, we might be able to advise on maybe not your first choice of resale, but if you go with your second choice, we know in the next 3 years or 4 years that multiple other owners may be selling in that area.
And we've got a real life example of that I'm sure you'll both be aware of. But we had a franchisee who bought a business from scratch. And, we knew multi-unit was what he always wanted to do. So he expanded into another new territory that I'll call Office B. And kind of probably within the first 3 to 4 months of him expanding into that area, Office C, which was just down the line from Office B, became available as a resale. Now, that was a no-brainer for us as a team. We gave that franchisee a call to say, I know you've expanded into Office B, but actually there's another office that is available. We think it would be part of your multi-unit strategy. And what we don't want to do is prevent you from expanding into Office C because you're still working on Office B, and Office C won't be available for another 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
So that franchisee actually paused, with our consent, paused that expansion into Office B, skipped onto Office C, and will then expand back into Office B a little bit further down the line. So the more we know, the better. The worst thing for us is when we sell a business and a franchisee says, well, I wanted that territory. And you think, if you'd have told me, we could have had these conversations. So it's definitely letting us know from the beginning and keeping us updated as well. Show us that you're hungry, show us you're driven for multi-unit, and, we'll be telling you everything that you need to do to get to that point.
Exactly.
And if I may, the process of acquisition, the technical process of acquisition, once you're already in the network, changes quite significantly. Again, I come back to the banks. They're the largest creditor. If a bank knows you're already in the network, their loan to value ratio will change significantly. So as an existing franchisee, your lifeblood is cash. That's absolutely critical. Do you want to be using all that cash for an acquisition? It may not necessarily be the wisest thing to do. So on a resale being bought by somebody already in the network, that loan to value ratio changes significantly. So 70% loan to value ratio as a starting point, but we've done loan to value ratio. Well, we haven't. The banks have provided loan to value ratios on big deals up to 95%. So what that means is that lifeblood of your business, the cash, the working capital, isn't being depleted to a massive degree by making an acquisition. So you have to take a longer term on it because you've got to service that debt, but that's what we're looking for from enterprise owners, from multi-unit owners, that they are taking a long-term view on it. But it doesn't become the cash-hungry beast for an existing owner that perhaps a new acquisition is.
Yeah. So actually getting in with one business, demonstrating strong performance, having a good relationship with national office, who also have a good relationship with the banks, it sort of puts you in good standing
much stronger position
for that snowball effect to happen, I suppose. Yeah. I think that it's nice to go into this amount of detail because I think that there are people who know actually for them, they don't want a year or 18 months of maybe the pressure of having to grow a business to that break-even point. They want to step into an existing business, but there's so many routes and opportunities and nuances of this that the amount of detail that we've been exploring this, I think, will be helpful for a variety of people. So I suppose I'll end with one final question, which is what advice would you give then to someone coming into this process looking at a resale?
Well, speak to me. Be transparent. We will do our best to try and make it work between the broker, the franchisor, the banks. We'll make that process work as best as we can. It needs to be fair. It needs to be ethical. I think if you are an entrepreneur, both of you know, I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs and we can get quite technical about how the deal's going to work, how the payback's going to work, what the multiples are, and we can become quite engrossed in that. But what I would say is, and it can be quite good fun, that getting into the nitty-gritty of a deal, and it's what makes it's what makes me tick. But I'd say never lose sight of the fact that there's franchisor who needs to work with. Well, I'll let you say it, Amy.
Yeah. So similar to Paul, be open and transparent, have that conversation, but I can really understand that if you're looking at a business, you do just want to speak to the broker and you want to get into the nitty-gritty, but you're buying into a brand, and it's the same for any franchisor. You're buying into a brand that is kind of going to represent you on a national level. Yeah. So you should also be wanting to know about that. So find out, operationally how you can grow. What can your team look like in 5 years? How can you improve your profitability? What support do we have? Like all of that may not seem as exciting in kind of the initial piece where you're trying to see if the business fits for you, but that's a big part of whether the business will fit for you. Do the directors represent you and your values? So really, it's a combined process, broker Absolutely. And franchisor for any franchisor, yeah. I would say. So you need to speak to both. Be going through this process and deciding if it is for you, because you may love the brand and hate the business, or you might love the business, hate the brand, and that's going to be an instant no.
They're almost symbiotic processes, aren't they? And they are separate and distinct entirely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you move too far ahead with one of them, you may then get a surprise with the other.
Yeah.
So actually engaging with, you would inquire with a brand, have an introductory conversation, and if, just as my advice would be for people looking at resales, well, I'll introduce you to Paul to look at the business itself, and I'll introduce you to Imi to look at Home Instead, its process, the brand, and what's expected of you as a franchisee. Neither one of those is more important than the other, and to proceed with them both at the same time is really, really good advice. So thank you both so much for coming in. It's been good to sit and talk about our day to day, hasn't it?
Thank you.
But no, I think that there'll be loads of people that have pulled bits of information out of that may have answered some important questions for them, and hopefully demystified part of the process, and hopefully settled some of the nerves perhaps. So thank you so much for all the info you both brought to it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Luke.